Okay, welcome everyone. My name's Andrew Laird. I'm the Chief Executive of Mutual Ventures. We're a consultancy that specialises in working with public services. If you're here to listen about why levelling up must mean levelling down on antisocial behaviour, then you're in the right place. So before I start, just want to make a few introductions. I'm delighted today to be joined by Kathy McArdle, who's the Service Director for Regeneration and Culture in Barnsley. Kathy, how are you doing? Good to see you. Also joined by Adam Hawksbee, who's the Deputy Director of the Onward think tank. Hi, Adam. And finally, my Mutual Ventures colleague, Anya Kemble, who is a former Ministry of Justice civil servant and has, I think, a very important perspective on this topic. So what are we talking about? Following up is still one of the main buzzwords around government, around public services, but quite often in the discussion, not enough focus is put on social capital and social infrastructure. So in terms of what that means in terms of an impact when we're under investing in social infrastructure and social capital, one of the main symptoms is an increase in antisocial behaviour. So antisocial behaviour challenges all of the other elements of levelling up. And whilst the government has an antisocial behaviour action plan, there's quite a big focus on punishment within that. But actually, what we're going to be talking about today really is that smart levelling up investments can focus more on prevention. And that's what our panellists will all be talking about today. So there's lots of great information. Kathy will be talking about her experience in Barnsley. Adam's going to talk about some really impressive research that Onward have been doing around the country on levelling up and what the main issues are and what some of the exciting ways that local areas are tackling those issues. And then Anya has a perspective which I'm going to invite her to give at the start from her experience of working within MOJ. So just in terms of housekeeping, we are recording this and we'll make the recording available, so there's no need to be frantically taking any notes. If you've got a question, you can pop it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window there, and I will do my best to try and get to as many of those questions as possible. So I think that's everything. So with no further ado, Anya, I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. So as Andrew said, I've recently joined Mutual Ventures and previously was working in central government, most recently in the Ministry of Justice. And it's been really interesting to come to Mutual Ventures. I'm sure lots of you know the work that we do around levelling up, supporting local areas in bidding for levelling up funding, but also thinking about implementation. So it's been quite interesting to bring those two perspectives, kind of the central government top down, we want to address an issue, here's a big funded programme we're going to do, versus kind of speaking and working with local areas and understanding what matters to them and to local communities. So levelling up won't be anything new, I'm sure, to everyone on this call, but it's interesting that levelling up is there to address kind of issues with physical infrastructure, drive economic growth, drive jobs, but an estimated only 2% of the funding has gone to address social infrastructure. At the same time, we've got this challenge around antisocial behaviour. We know that communities are concerned about it. We know it's not a new issue. We'll have all remembered the days of ASBOs and the kind of New Deal for communities in the Blair era. But actually, the main kind of crux of my article was thinking about whether an opportunity has been missed or could be harnessed further to look at how levelling up could invest in social infrastructure to really help address some of those issues around antisocial behaviour and crime. Lots of those levelling up areas also have kind of crossover with antisocial behaviour and crime, and actually could levelling up funding, could the focus of levelling up also be broader? Because I think there's an issue or a challenge where you can kind of invest in that physical infrastructure, but actually if communities don't feel cohesive, if they don't feel safe, if they don't feel kind of listened to and won, how far can that physical infrastructure go in levelling up an area? And I think there's something around thinking beyond punishment. So there is some mention in the action plan around sports opportunities, the turnaround programme, which the government is already doing. But I think there's a real need to think about investing in opportunities in local areas, investing in local public services. You know, things like mentoring, particularly for young people, have a real impact in supporting young people who might go in to engage in crime. And actually, should we be doing more, going further, to make sure those opportunities are there for people, particularly in deprived communities, and also thinking about how we empower communities. So community leaders are best placed and will know what issues people care about, where there might be issues around trust with kind of authority. I think we need to basically overall think about whether we can really level up areas without addressing social infrastructure and antisocial behaviour and crime. So we, I think, need to go beyond just a focus on physical infrastructure to really achieve that. So that's the crux of basically what I was arguing in the article. It'll be really interesting to hear from Kathy, who's kind of got that direct experience, and Adam, who has, as Andrew said, wrote that really interesting report. So I'll hand back to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Anya. Just a couple of questions for you, and I should say to Kathy and Adam, if you want to ask anybody a question, just pop your hand up and I'll bring you in. So just, Anya, thinking about your time in MOJ, I know that you've worked in a number of private offices there of very senior people. How much of the kind of day-to-day discussion is about this type of thing, or is it more corporate, more kind of, what's it like?
I guess it depends. I mean, obviously, it depends on the private office you're working in, the portfolio of the minister and the private office. I mean, I think in this government, it's now come back onto the agenda. I don't think necessarily antisocial behaviour and crime has been on the agenda consistently, and that will be for a whole host of reasons. I mean, we were dealing with a pandemic and Brexit and things like that. But I think something has to be quite a salient issue and a priority driven from the centre and from number 10. And then it is driven then from, private offices. You'll see ministers, they'll do visits, they'll want to understand what's going on in areas. So it is something, I think, if it's on the government agenda and it's being driven at the centre, you do then see in the day-to-day working that ministers will be on top of that, will want to know kind of what's being done. And on the flip side, for civil servants, you'll have a team where this will be their focus, and you'll have really high quality civil servants trying to drive that forward, engaging with local government, local communities where appropriate, to understand what's happening on the ground. But I think also vital is what's happening at that local level, because often, particularly in a department like the Ministry of Justice, it's 88,000 people and huge. You rely heavily on arm's length organisations, local authorities to support and kind of be with you to really, I think, fully deliver policy interventions. Yeah,
and just on that then, so how much of the delivery happens at MOJ? Because one of the first things that we talked about when you joined was about the funding flows and how that works. So does the ministry normally have a tight grip on what happens with its funding locally, or is that kind of handed out with a lot of flexibility locally?
Again, I'd say it depends on the area, but so MOJ is huge, and the portfolio it looks after is massive. So you've got prisons and probation, for example. So funding will go to prisons and probation, and it's looked after by that arm's length body. Again, you've got the court system, again, huge, and there's people working in HMCTS to manage that. But I think if you think about some of the funding flows, so for example, victim funding, that is something that we would grant fund to organisations that are much better placed, have specialist experts who are able to support victims in quite horrible times in their life. And I think it makes absolute sense that you're funding that organisation. Or if you think around recent funding they announced for sports for young people to try and kind of intervene early so they don't get involved in crime, it makes sense you would give that to an organisation who, it's their bread and butter. They know way better than central government how and what local areas need. So I think it depends, but I think definitely across multiple government departments, there's a real reliance on the third sector, local organisations and local authorities to kind of support funding going to the right places and helping the right people.
Fantastic, thanks, Anya. I'll leave you be for now, and we'll move on. Kathy, it'd be great to hear from you, just if you have any reflections on what Anya said, but really importantly, just hear a little bit about what you're doing in Barnsley.
Well, I mean, I'm in absolute agreement with everything that Anya has said. I think we're underinvesting in social infrastructure through not just Levelling Up Fund, but across all of the different government funds. However, at a local authority level, Barnsley have invested quite heavily in some of that social infrastructure. For example, and we've also invested heavily in the transformation of our town centre. A £210 million regeneration project has completely changed the town centre, improved the quality of the public realm, improved the retail, leisure and kind of learning offer, and really diversified the use of the town centre. There's a new cinema, a new Super Bowl, a new library, a new maker space, all gathered around what was the old Barnsley indoor market. Now, as part of that, the council also created space for our partners like South Yorkshire Police to be based in the Glassworks. So they're co-located with our teams and our Glassworks Centre management team, but they also work very closely with a kind of a team of town centre wardens who engage with people who are, engaged in antisocial behaviour, but in a really positive way. And we also have a programme of night marshals who look after people in the nighttime economy. So one of the things that we've done in Barnsley is we've developed a very integrated place-based approach to managing ASB and supporting vulnerable people. But that approach was delivered by a number of different teams. It was delivered by our public health team who looked after Purple Flag, which shows we have a safe nighttime economy. It was delivered by our town centre urban centres team, and it was also delivered by our housing options team as well, who were looking after those who were homeless and living on the streets. So what we did was we brought together a town centre team who are focused around the town centre and the Glassworks to really support us in managing antisocial behaviour. And we work really closely with South Yorkshire Police and the courts, who are also based in the town centre, to do that. So as part of that transformation, we've also invested in that social infrastructure, particularly for young people. So we already had coming on stream a £10 million youth zone with Onside, which will offer world-class leisure and sports and cultural facilities for young people in the town centre. But as part of our Levelling Up bid, we decided that we were going to bid for a project called Barnsley Futures, which was really focused on creating positive alternatives and opportunities for young people. The leader of Barnsley Council is very passionate about the fact that many young people don't have access to social and cultural capital learning opportunities, and that's part of what contributes to inequalities in Barnsley and in our society. So we wanted to make sure that we were creating those opportunities for young people. So our Levelling Up projects were decided through a mixture of kind of policy framework, I suppose partnerships that we already had built through the Community Renewal Fund, incidentally, and through some research we did with youth and community work partners. And we're also built on that partnership approach with the community voluntary sector. And our Levelling Up project has three strands. One is an activity park for young people right beside the transport interchange in the town centre, which will offer outdoor activities and amenities for young people. We've also invested in transforming one of our own buildings into the Northern Academy for Vocal Excellence, which is a centre for music making and singing that builds young people's confidence and cultural capital. And we're going to community asset transfer that building to a brilliant organisation called Barnsley Youth Choir, who train 700 young people across Barnsley in music making and singing activities every single week. Young people from the ages of 3 right through to 26 experience that kind of music making, and also work as part of a network of international music making organizations as well, because they are a renowned choir that are kind of 5th in the world ranked as a choir. And then the third element of the Levelling Up project is that we're going to refurbish a health and well-being hub, which we run with the YMCA and Chili Pep. And that health and well-being hub is going to be brought up to a really good standard. So it offers a safe space for young people who need early support. It offers mentoring. for young people, peer-to-peer mentoring, which is absolutely crucial for young people who don't have access to that mentoring in their home environment. And it will also offer, trusted adults who can give really good advice and support for young people as well. And that will tie in with the activity park. That also connects to a youth hub that we're developing, which is a kind of support space for young carers who are leaving care, and also a support space for young people who are trying to move out of the criminal justice system and trying to kind of rebuild their lives as well. So you can see that we've invested very heavily in the capital infrastructure of the town centre to make sure it feels like an inclusive and supportive space for young people and offers them lots of opportunities. We are also investing through our Levelling Up project in the Civic, which is an arts and cultural centre for young people, and they have a focus on 18 to 30-year-old young people as well. So part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that we have a kind of cradle to grave offering in many ways, and that young people from the age of 3 right through to 26 and 30 have access to a range of, health and well-being, cultural and sporting facilities and opportunities, and that those spaces also offer, the right adults and the right support for them to develop their resilience, their confidence, their self-esteem, and I suppose their skills as well. Our employability service are also based in the Health and Wellbeing Hub as well, so that young people, as they build and grow their confidence, also get support to begin to access employment, and so that they can get ready for and get on in work as well. And it's all part of our place-based approach to the town centre, and also our integrated approach to supporting young people. Now, we all know that antisocial behaviour isn't just about young people, and Barnsley, like all towns, has half-term weeks where young people go rampaging on bicycles around the town centre, and the town centre wardens and our security teams and South Yorkshire Police and the staff of the interchange, have to engage with them, gamify that to some extent, and have to address that kind of behaviour. But really, our emphasis and our policy is all about offering positive alternatives, rather than necessarily offering delivering on a kind of punitive way. And we only use punitive measures as a kind of point of last resort. Is that enough by way of a kind of story?
Yeah, that's a fantastic story. Thank you so much. I mean, it's amazing that your Levelling Up project is almost entirely social infrastructure. Which is fantastic. And do you as a council, did you have to make the case internally that this will lead to economic benefits, or was it enough that it's just good for people and makes it a nicer place to be and makes a more fulfilling place for young people to be?
Well, we didn't really have to fight very hard to make the case, partly because the Glassworks development itself has been enormously successful. Improving the design of the public realm, improving the sociability of the space, creating a new square where people come together, developing an events program for the town centre. All of that has resulted in increased footfall, significant economic benefit for the town, and also attracted businesses to the town that never would have come previously. So the Glassworks did a lot of the legwork for us in terms of making the case. For Levelling Up, of course, we had to argue that it would have health and well-being benefits for young people. We obviously had to demonstrate we were bringing new floor space back into use. We had to demonstrate increased GVA, but it's not that difficult to make the argument for this work. I was really interested in the UK Youth report that quantified the economic benefits of youth work. I've always been a passionate believer in youth work and the power of youth work for young people who don't have access to advice and support necessarily in their home environment, or who live in chaotic life environments. So it was really interesting. There's a cost to not investing in social infrastructure, or not investing in the people who deliver it. And so we made the argument not on a negative basis, we made the argument on a positive basis. And all of these activities will contribute to more people coming into the town centre and increased visitor spend. And we also made the argument that young people don't stay young forever. If you create an inclusive place where young people you know, where young people enjoy their leisure time, enjoy socializing. Those young people grow up to be professionals and employees in organizations in the town, and go to spend their money in a place that they really feel proud of. So, you know, we also made the argument on that basis as well. This wasn't just about 3-year-olds, it was about 3-year-olds who would grow up to be, you know, 25-year-old young professionals in the town centre. So you've
Yeah,
got to take that long-term view.
definitely. Yeah, no, I think that's great. And certainly a lot of the areas we've supported through the Levelling Up Fund, we try and keep a big focus on that social capital element of it as well. And I know that the people watch, some of you will be thinking about levelling up round 3 bits.
Yeah.
And certainly our experience is that the ones that have a heavy dose of social infrastructure, social capital investment alongside proof that it improves the economy tend to do quite well. Kathy, I know Anya's got a question for you. Anya, do you want to come in?
Thank you. Yeah, Kathy, I was going to ask, you were talking before about the role of kind of police and other organisations in supporting the overall programme of work that you just discussed. I wonder how important multi-agency working is to kind of support those overall interventions, and I suppose linked to that, how you keep those relationships effective and, you know, that shared vision of what you're trying to do in Barnsley.
I mean, there's a number of questions there. I mean, multi-agency working is the only way of working, I would say, Anya, in that place-based role. What we find is that, particularly with South Yorkshire Police and the justice system, our children's services team work very closely with the justice system and on the care hub, and that co-location of the police, the town centre wardens and other services, we found made a huge difference, because those relationships are built over cups of tea in a shared canteen and walking the same streets together. We also do that at a structural level as well. So we have a number of programme boards where those partners come together. So for example, we have a nighttime economy board where the police have been very active in helping us address the spiking issue a couple of years ago that was very prevalent for young women in some of our bars and clubs. And we have very strong relationships with the police. In fact, Barnsley Council funds some of the policing function. And one of the things I really want to say on this webinar is that we really, if we're going to address antisocial behaviour, we need more investment in policing. Because when you get brilliant police officers working closely with you, they make a massive difference, because they add to your repertoire of strategies and tools, you know, to address antisocial behaviour. We also co-located with the housing options team, so we could pick up vulnerable people, and the police also help us in terms of doing drug raids. You know, they give us advice on, they'll give us a heads up as when they're doing drug raids in the town centre as well. So it's a really close working relationship that works across my team, the public health team and our communities team. So it's very much about breaking down silos.
Yeah, thank you very much. Adam, sorry for leaving it so long before bringing you in, but I'll hand over to you now. You can tell us a bit what you've been doing, and if you've got any reflections on what you've heard as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's been great to hear some of the contributions, and I think a lot of that is reflected in the work. A lot of what has been found is reflected in the work that we did. So we didn't set out to do work on antisocial behaviour. We did a piece of work called Levelling Up in Practice, where we went to a series of places across the UK. We went to Walsall, Oldham, South Tyneside, Clacton, and Barry. We did some kind of shorter visits to Barnstable as well. And what we were looking at is, what does levelling up actually mean to people on the ground? So the national agenda was, if not well understood, at least well trailed. That, you know, this was about big infrastructure projects and manufacturing and heavy industry. And yes, of course, there is a bit of that big national stuff about how we ensure that all parts of the country are contributing to economic growth. But we wanted to know what leaders on the ground prioritise and what communities themselves prioritised. And we spoke both to members of the public through focus groups and to civil society organisations, to businesses, to business leaders. And what was really interesting is that the number one thing that came up, often when you ask people, is this area going in the right or the wrong direction? Or when I say, you know, levelling up, what do you think of? The example that people would go to would be antisocial behaviour. So they'd say, look, let me tell you about this fountain on the waterfront that used to be, when it was built, this real source of pride for the area. And now it's a range of people sitting on it, drinking super strong beer all throughout the day. Let me tell you about this nursery or this sports cage that was open or anything else. They'll tell you about a place and how that place has been afflicted by, or the quality of it has been reduced by, access to it has been reduced by antisocial behaviour. And they're very quick to say that that is something that affects their pride in their area. It's one of the reasons they'll say why their kids are moving away, or businesses don't want to bring clients there, etc., etc. And that language is reflected in the public. What's really interesting to us is that always came through in focus groups. It rarely came through when we spoke to local authorities. So but then when we presented them with the evidence, when we said, it's funny, we've just done some focus groups and we've heard this is a big problem, they'll say, oh yeah, absolutely. And then they'll start talking, those of them that are residents, more like residents. They'll say, on my road, or as I commute, or when I try and go to the football game with my son or my daughter. And so it seemed like this was something where it was a huge community concern, but hadn't filtered through to policy. And that makes sense, because as the contributions with Kathy and Anya have reflected, it's a kind of slightly amorphous, locally rooted thing. It's not something that's enormously easy to measure. It's not something that there's a huge amount of policy research. You know, most councils don't have a director of antisocial behaviour or something similar. It sits between a range of different bodies and organisations. It's also quite ill-defined in and of itself. You know, antisocial behaviour is not the same as low-level crime. It's also not the same as kind of non-criminal activity like loitering or something else. It's kind of a combination of the two. So as quick as members of the public were to say antisocial behaviour is a real problem, they're also quick to say, but we don't want people locked up for it, right? And this is something that Kathy was emphasising about not being overly punitive. What they didn't want is a return to ASBOs or young people getting locked away. And I'm kind of slipping into the language of young people here, but it was felt that this was primarily a challenge with young people. In fact, there's two groups, young people, and what one person in a focus group decides is deadbeats, dropouts, and down and outs. Not a term that is accurate policy-wise, or one that I would want to see in a government document. But what they meant by that were people that were often homeless, often struggling with addiction, often have mental health problems. And they could often name them, right? There's a person that's outside Tesco, or a person that sleeps on a bench. So it's those two groups, both of whom they wanted to be supported. What they wanted was those groups to, so for young people, to have somewhere to go, the types of activities that Kathy was describing, the types of places owned by the community that Kathy was describing that was so important. They needed those sorts of areas and the sorts of areas and activities. And for the individuals that might be, you know, one or two people that might be responsible for a disproportionate number of antisocial behaviour reports, they wanted them to have access to housing, to treatment, whether that's from, you know, access from a police force or from a council or community group that intervenes. So that that parallel between, it's a massive priority, but it's about prevention and a little bit of punishment, but very much prevention as the key force, was what came through in our work. And as is probably clear from the examples I'm giving, hugely place-based, a lot of it in the town centre on the high street or on the estate also, so where people live within kind of housing that was owned by housing associations. It was often on that particular estate or in that particular village or neighbourhood that this was a real problem. And we've been pleased that we've fed a bunch of stuff into the government, that they've released their antisocial behaviour action plan. The politics of that probably drove it to be a little bit more punitive as opposed to preventative than I would like, but there is a lot of really excellent stuff there on prevention, both on things like hotspots policing. So I think Kathy is right that we probably do need to invest more. But even if you hold resources constant, using things like hotspots policing, identifying where those hotspots are, investing resources to solve the underlying problems, and then monitoring the data so that you move to wherever the most recent hotspot is really good evidence that that works. And investing in youth centres, in mentoring, in some of the relationships and the spaces that really help young people. So this needs to be a really big priority. You cannot, to go back to my original point, you cannot just focus on tackling antisocial behaviour and not bringing back high quality manufacturing jobs or improving foreign direct investment. But it's not an either or, it's a both and. They require different teams within a council, different types of funding, different forms of policy intervention. But unless you're dealing with your kind of wobbly foundations and your limited frontiers, then you're going to be in real trouble. So you've got to do both of those things at once, which I think is the key message on this stuff.
Fantastic, Adam. Thank you very much. Kathy, do you want to come in?
I mean, I do think I would agree with you that the government's antisocial behaviour action plan it veers towards the punitive. But I do think we collectively can change the discourse on that over the coming months, especially in the run up to the general election. I'd like to just say a little bit about housing and estates, because I think housing is absolutely crucial, because the quality of housing in an area often determines people's sense of pride and identity in an area. So, for example, obviously moving away from Barnsley Town Centre, we were fortunate enough to be awarded Goldthorpe Towns investment funding to really refurbish pre-1919 housing and alleyways, which really bred antisocial behaviour. So improving the quality of housing and the quality of urban design in an area can really kind of lift an area and create a sense of place and that pride of place. In Goldthorpe, we also demolished an eyesore building, which is the Horse and Groom pub, because that's a great example, isn't it, of where people see a building that almost becomes symbolic of the decline of an area, the lack of jobs and the lack of opportunities. And we're demolishing that and creating a new market space and a new open public space, which I think, again, is really important, that if you demolish something, you create something positive in its place. And I suppose the last thing I would say is that we work very closely with Barnsley Homes, which is our arm's length management organisation. So again, coming back to Anya's point about partnership, it's really important. They have housing management officers in all of our estates, and who link in with the tenants and the individuals who occupy our 18,000 homes, and their role in kind of managing very low level antisocial behaviour before it escalates to the police or to our antisocial behaviour team is really important, because they can really calm things down in a local area as well, because they already have those existing relationships. Lastly, I also think we really need to invest more in the community and voluntary sector, but that shouldn't be done by central government. I think that absolutely has to be done by channeling more resources through the local authorities, because they know exactly where the kind of hyper local work is needed, and they also know where the expertise is in that community voluntary sector in particular areas as well.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I have to say, I never liked the story where a pub's being demolished. That breaks my heart, I have to say.
Well,
But,
it does,
I mean, I don't
because
know.
they're great badges of identity, aren't they, for communities?
Yeah, they are.
Social hubs, yeah.
They really are. I just want to come back to what I thought was one of the key points Lynn made around when you talk to residents, antisocial behaviour came up and their personal experience of what different areas used to be lovely and used to be nice places to go or not. But when you talked to the council initially, that it didn't come up. Why do you both think that is? Is this about it not being clear who has responsibility or accountability for that type of kind of softer look and feel element of what a place is like, or is it just that it's too hard and it's impossible to kind of write down a plan for it? Why do you think that kind of initially, when you're asked for the kind of corporate response, that stuff didn't come up from a council perspective? Oh, sorry. Okay, Kathy, you go first, then Adam. Yeah.
I'll go first. I mean, I think it's so much part of business as usual for a local authority that I don't think they think about it very much. They do place management all the time. They manage bins, on people's streets. They manage fly tipping, which is also an element of antisocial behaviour. They manage public space. They keep public space clean. So for them, it's a lot of business as usual. One of the things I find, though, is in Barnsley, and I hope this isn't telling tales, but every 2 months, we do a walk around the town centre with the leader, and we pick up our grot spots. We identify areas where we think are contributing to antisocial behaviour, and we clean them up. We get the grass cut. We use our planning enforcement powers to tidy up particular areas as well with private sector businesses, because the look and feel of a place contributes to its sense of decline. And also, if you have in our heritage action zone, we've lit up new alleyways. Street lighting is really important to people's sense of safety as well. We've redesigned and put new cobblestones in some of our alleyways, because it is a constantly evolving picture. So I think it's really a big priority for councils, but I think it's just, it doesn't come up in conversation particularly. On the issue of who's the director for who manages antisocial behaviour, there usually is one key. In Barnsley, we have one point of accountability in the council, who is our service director for health, for communities, and he looks after the ASB kind of teams, the housing options team, etc. But it's all about integration and place-based working. If it doesn't matter if you've got one point of accountability, if everybody isn't working to the same plan and isn't aligned.
Great, thank you. Adam, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think, look, I mean, lots of parts of the public sector and private sector aren't good at multi-agency work across boundaries, right? And the more something is about the complexity of people's lives and the kind of messiness, then the harder that is to do, right? So you can, and you know, sometimes silos are brilliant, right? Like if you need to build a bit of infrastructure or need to do particular things, sometimes it is very helpful to delineate a project and get that thing done. And if you were looking to, I don't know, quadruple the number of mentors that there are in an area, then doing that within a council in a team, that might be helpful. But tackling antisocial behaviour, which is really just a corollary of strengthening an area's social fabric and a sense of belonging, is fundamentally a collaborative task. And that means that it is very, very difficult for a council to do. I think there's also a political pressure here, right? So there is a reluctance sometimes for a local authority to take responsibility for a thing that it can't fully address, because you politically lose for that. If you set a target that you're going to reduce antisocial behaviour by a certain amount and you don't have all the levers to do that, then politically that can really hit you. So it's probably a better idea to, yes, do the multi-agency working, but say, look, this is a police matter. And in the public mind, often antisocial behaviour is a policing matter. It's been really interesting being involved in this, that often when you know, run a panel event on antisocial behaviour or run a roundtable, you find yourself inviting police and crime commissioners or policing think tanks, not youth agencies or youth organisations. So I can understand why this is a problem, because it's just an instance of multi-agency, a challenging multi-agency working. But that's all the more reason to lean into it as opposed to lean away from it.
Exactly. Adam, I just wanted to pick up on another really important point that you made, that what we're talking about now isn't an alternative to the importance of attracting investment, new businesses, creating jobs. It has to go alongside it. But I just wonder, from both of your experiences, how much an inward investor in an area or a potential investor in an area, now they obviously are going to want to know about the skills and the workforce that's available or could be available, but they also probably want to know about what the place is going to be like to live in and what it's going to be like to be in, and also what are the public services like, what's the public service provision like, schools, you know, doctors, that type of thing. Could you comment on that, Kathy? I'll come to you. I can see you nodding, so I'll come to you first.
Well, I mean, place quality is one of the key areas that any inward investor looks at. You know, they look at the quality of accommodation, housing for their staff. They look at the quality of the schooling. They look at Ofsted reports often for schools and children, occasionally, you know, we've had an inward investor come and visit Barnsley Town Centre, and they get approached by somebody who's begging, or they see somebody behaving oddly in the street because they're stoned or they're suffering from alcohol abuse, and it doesn't create a positive impression, you know. So one of the things that you need to be really careful about is there's a politics, I think, about how you are both compassionate as a place and look after those who are vulnerable, and also how you make sure that it doesn't impact on the perception of the town. So we've done quite a lot of perception surveys in Barnsley Town Centre, and since we introduced the joining forces model, you know, perceptions of safety in the town centre have gone up quite significantly. It's a key indicator that people will look for. They'll also look for good transport links, active travel routes, etc. You know, so it's part of it's all interdependent, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Adam?
So I think inward investors, I think there's a lot of like kind of crystal ball gazing about like inward investors. Like they basically all just have spreadsheets, right? And numbers and weightings. And they're like, what are the things I care about? How much do I care about this? And therefore what number pops out the other end? And that might produce some sort of short list of where you'll invest or where you'll go in terms of a relocation. And then you will go to that place, have some conversations, see what you can negotiate, etc., etc. I think this stuff matters at both of those stages. On the numbers stage, as Kathy says, they will absolutely have things like, what is the effective size of my labour market? How many people could reach the place I'm going to be investing in or work? What is the skill level in that labour market? And so you're looking at kind of technical skills and high level skills. Will my workers be happy in this place? And so that's when you're looking at availability of school places, of amenities, that sort of stuff. So in all of those numbers, these things matter. Are you going to actively measure antisocial behaviour rate? Probably not, but there might be proxies for that. So there might be population inflow and outflow. That's going to be something that's effective, right? So the numbers stage, it matters. But it also really matters at that soft stage when they go to a place. So when we did some work in Clacton, there's an industrial estate there that's got some really kind of world-leading firms. You often find this, that in kind of so-called left-behind places, what you have is an industrial estate where there's a business that does something incredible and is selling all around the world. I think in Dudley, they have one of the companies, you know, those like 4D rides you go on, like the Harry Potter World ones and stuff. Like all the carriages and tracks for those things are made on some industrial estate in Dudley. And that's because they're a very small business that do a very specific thing to a very specific market. Similar one in Clacton. So there were a few of these companies. And the chief exec said to us, look, I had some inward investors and I wanted to show them my product, but there's no way to get them to my industrial estate unless they go to Clacton train station, basically walk through and around the high street and come to my office. And that is an embarrassing walk for them. We heard a similar thing on South Tyneside. It's embarrassing for me to take people to my office and then get a cup of coffee because I don't know what I'm going to see on the street. And human, right? That probably doesn't affect that spreadsheet decision, but it does affect the decision when you're down to a few and you're thinking, okay, where could I do business? So I think this stuff, social infrastructure, social fabric, matters on the margins in terms of the soft stuff, and it also matters when it comes to data analytics as well.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Kathy, I just want to ask you about, so one of the things we do a lot of work with areas on is deciding on which projects to include in either their portfolio of levelling up projects or more specifically as part of a levelling up fund bid. And we usually do a theory of change process where you kind of get everybody together, agree what the main challenges are that you're facing, what your vision and outcomes you want to achieve, and use those two bookends to test the usually quite long list of projects and some pet projects that people have that they all want to cram in to a levelling up bid. How did you decide on the three key elements of your levelling up project?
I mean, firstly, levelling up project decision making is probably an art, not a science in many ways. As you appreciate, Angie. You'll be aware we bid for 2 projects as part of levelling up round 1 and we're not successful, and we submitted 2 bids on this occasion. So it was first of all, we did a bit of a matrix. Where we assessed each of the proposal projects that were kind of project ready against our own outcomes for the Barnsley 2030 vision and priorities, and we also measured them against the kind of social capitals and the levelling up missions as well. So that matrix gave us a sense of which ones we felt actually met the criteria for the missions. We also canvassed our elected members as well on some of the projects, and the leader of the council as well, and we also submitted a paper to Cabinet, which was in the public domain, and we did some consultation as well with our area councils and ward alliances, because we've got a very developed kind of neighbourhoods social infrastructure there as well. But fundamentally it came down to, we wanted to have a coherent vision and a focus, a really clear focus as to what difference we were going to make, and we decided it was going to be in the lives of children and young people. We were fortunate that we had a kind of a collection of projects which were partnerships with the community voluntary sector, where we were tapping into existing assets. So we already had a capital project on the slate that we were working on with the Civic Arts Centre. We already had discussions with the YMCA and Chili Pep about the need to refurbish their health and well-being hub space, and we already had on-site on board for the youth zone, but we were aware that the area around the youth zone didn't actually have any amenity. So it was a combination of opportunism, analysis, and then testing some of our assumptions against the levelling up bid process, because the bid itself, forces you to answer certain questions around viability, around BCR, etc. So just a process of constant dialogue, sitting down with the levelling up guidelines, and I suppose always trying to keep our eye on what we were trying to achieve. We worked on the theory of change very early on, actually. Getting
That's
that
critical.
right.
That's absolutely critical. Yeah. We have been in trying to support a few councils who have tried to do that initial theory of change project shortlisting during the bidding window, and it just left, it was incredibly chaotic, and it just left it really tight at the end to try and get the actual bid done. So we keep telling people, decide on your projects up front and early. Now, we don't know exactly what the themes and criteria will be for round 3, but my guess is that given round 1 and 2 were pretty much exactly the same, round 3 might be similar as well. So
we did also speak to our MPs as well, because it was one of the criteria for the bid. So speaking with your MPs and getting them behind you is really, really crucial. They may or may not do some advocacy for you internally in Parliament, but it doesn't really matter. It's just getting them on board helps unlock another, lots of support. I would suggest, though, that there are complexities in working with partners for a local authority that we have found since we started our delivery, because the local authority is delivering a capital project for and on behalf of a voluntary community organisation. And we made some errors in setting up the project, and we didn't put in enough resource or capacity in the voluntary and community sector organisations. So we're having to do some work on that retrospectively. And also, we should have involved young people more thoroughly in the development process in submitting the bid, and we didn't do that. So now we're actually adopting the Barnsley Youth Engagement Charter and working directly with young people to involve them. So I think involvement early doors of your stakeholders is really key as well, particularly at what's going to be a very competitive stage, I would imagine.
Exactly, Kathy, exactly. So I want to let you both go at 5 to 11, but I know Anya's got a quick question for Adam around data.
Yeah, earlier you were mentioning data and kind of, I think, the lack of data in this space. I know a key part of the action plan is around data and accountability. I wondered, from the work that you did and speaking to authorities in those areas, one, how bad is the data issue? How much do they understand what's going on? And two, how important do you think it is that they get that right to really tackle this?
So the best person on this is Professor Lawrence Sherman at Cambridge University, who leads a lot of their work on criminology. And his key point is always that if you can measure this stuff effectively, that drives a lot of the hotspots type approaches that I described. Now, the challenges with measurement around this are underreporting, misreporting. So underreporting partly driven. The challenge is the more severe the problem is, the more underreporting you're likely to have, because no one thinks you're going to do anything about it. So why would they report it? And then misreporting, because there are some sorts of antisocial behaviour that might have lots of reporting. So the whole kind of squeaky wheel thing, the window twitcher, might be areas where neighbours are just more likely to complain about it compared to other groups that might be more deprived or more marginalised, are less likely to call up the police or a council. The data is really difficult. What I think you need to do is to have a system which can capture different forms of data and kind of code them properly. And that's not always a manual process. You can work out definitionally what things you want to look at and then target resources to them. So what do I mean by that? Antisocial behaviour, you might decide there are a range of different types, and the input into that data system might be calls to the police. It might be reports to the council. It might be housing associations talking about their complaint hotlines. It might be victims groups. So there are national and local victims charities putting in their reporting. It might be shelters for people that have come in that are seeking protection from some form of abuse. It might be youth workers. What you need to do is have a mechanism, whether that was that certain individuals, when they go up a certain threshold of offending that's below a criminal one, get some sort of ID within a system, whatever else it is, or whether you do it based on a place. So you might kind of geolocate each of these complaints and say, okay, we don't know if these are 50 complaints about one person or one complaint each about 50 people, but we do know they've all happened on this street corner or outside this cafe or this chicken shop or whatever else. So the data bit is enormously important, and I think it requires just a really good set of like data engineers and a kind of system that you put it into. But it's a classic kind of rubbish in, rubbish out. You can do all the data analytics you want on police reports, and that could say here's the hotspot. But actually, if everyone's not complaining to the police, they're complaining to a local neighborhood group or their housing provider, then you've missed the problem.
Thanks, Adam. Kathy, do you want to add anything to that as a final comment before I draw things to a close? And if anybody, any of the rest of you want to say anything before we leave, then please have a think about that. But Kathy, do you want to respond to that?
Just that, I mean, data is absolutely key, but it's also very slippery, as you say, Adam. And capturing both quantitative and qualitative data through all those different channels is really challenging, I think. And you probably need somebody who is the steward of the data. I mean, we have a business intelligence unit who capture data on things like footfall in the town centre, ASB behaviour, but I would have to say we wouldn't have it all centrally in one place. But if you're going to shift the dial on investment in social infrastructure, you've got to demonstrate that it's making a difference through that data. So you've got to find a way of capturing it. I think it'd be really interesting to do a bit of a workshop on that, or a bit of a webinar on that, actually, and bring you people. How do you, from multi-agency working is fine, but you get very different quality and type of data from the police than you do from our security team, than you do from our town centre wardens team. And it also has to be very qualitative rather than quantitative as well. So I think that's a big challenge.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Any final thoughts from anyone, or shall I draw us to a close?
Just that this is the way to go, isn't it? You know, Anya's right. I know that sounds really simplistic, but you know, we have to make good some of the loss of really good youth work infrastructure, you know, the loss of good social infrastructure to create thriving places that are genuinely inclusive and where people are genuinely going to have access to opportunities. We've got to create those positive alternatives for people.
Yeah. I mean, my big takeaways from this conversation we've just had is that the social infrastructure, investing in social capital is a critical part of the puzzle. You know, you do need that inward investment, new business and jobs, but it's all part of the same puzzle. You can't, you know, it's like the different legs of a stool that you can't do without an element of it. And just really a call out to those of you thinking about leveling up round 3. Get started, start the conversations, like Kathy was saying, engage with people, talk to as many people as possible, get that long list of potential projects, and go through a process where you decide which ones you're actually going to put forward. Because if you leave it until the window opens, then again, your process will be very, very flawed and very stressful for you. Presumably the people listening to this are the people who would have responsibility for it. So lastly, just a huge thank you to Kathy. I think what you're doing at Barnsley is really exciting. The way that you express it, you've clearly got real passion for it, and that's so important as well, to have somebody in a council who really feels it. And I love the way you were talking about, you know, doing what to just actually see and feel and touch how it is. And I'm sure that's not something that people in MOJ, in Whitehall and other parts of the country do a lot of. So that's really important. And Adam, thank you for sharing your research as well. What I will do is I'll send, when I'm sending around the recording and we're promoting it on social media, I'll attach a link to your reports on this as well. So if you want to just buzz it over to me, I can include that. And Anya, thank you to you as well for sharing your thoughts and for writing the initial article. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a really good rest of the day.